the biggest thing is something that you mentioned yourself, which is the preemptive play, right? The preemptive play is very prevalent in like everything that you do. And I think the way I see you approach it is that you're like, what it looks like to me is there's always an option that is correct. And if you just find the correct option all the time, then you can continually win every interaction. That is what it looks like to me.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that makes sense, right? So continually, I'm just writing a few things down and then we'll go from there. So continually win the interactions through finding the right option every single time. Now, can you do this reactively or do you have to do this preemptively? What do you think?
I would say it's, I mean, when you're playing reactively, you're kind of, see, and this is what I struggle with. When you're playing reactively, I feel like you're at the mercy of your opponent's options. So kind of from your perspective, I like that idea of like, well, you know, is there always a correct option? I feel like when I let the opponent always press the first button, then I'm just hoping that they pick the wrong.
Right. Good. So if I react, I give my opponent room to pick the right option. Now, let me ask you another question, right? Let's say you as Young Link, you're constantly pressing the first button, but you have to press the correct button. Just like if you give your opponent room and you're kind of like hoping they do the wrong thing, it's the same thing the other way around, right? So let's say you press 100 buttons in a single stock. Do you think you can make all 100 of them correct?
No.
Do you think MK Leo makes all 100 of them correct?
Right, exactly.
No. So the stress that you are feeling over having to pick an option so that you're not at the mercy of your opponent puts you at the mercy of your own human limitations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So if acting preemptively, you give yourself room to be wrong. Now, let me ask you another question. When are you more likely to be correct? If you're A, preemptively picking an option based on the current situation, or B, taking a moment to react to developments and then acting on the resulting situations. What do you think is more easy to be accurate in?
So I think, in my opinion, that seems sort of contextual because especially in a matchup like this, right? If I have a boomerang above him covering jump, and then there's a bomb at his feet, so he can't just stand there. He has to either sit and shield or move. I've limited enough options where the odds are more stacked in my favor to preempt, right?
Mm-hmm.
But vice versa, if he's got, you know, a grenade at my foot and he's got one that he's cooking that he's about to just chuck at me, he's got so many zones covered that if I try to preempt with anything, I'm just going to run into something and get hit.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's a really good answer. So what you're saying is basically if it's in my favor, I have the room to preempt because it's hard for him to beat my preemption. But if it's in his favor, then my preemption will generally lose, which I think is very accurate. Now, the hard question here is what if you're not sure? So what if we're in neutral and you're not sure if you're stronger or if they are stronger? What would be easier? What would be easier to be correct with? Reaction or preemption?
I would say, I mean, it would have to be reaction as long as you understood what the correct follow-up is. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Sense.
No, that makes sense. So here's the way I look at it, right? I think reaction and preemption are a false dichotomy. That makes a lot of sense to talk about because, like, if I look at the way you play, I understand why you self-describe like as a preemptive player. But in reality, like if you think about it, when you do something preemptively, you don't do it outside of the context of the situation in which you press the button, right? You do it in the situation in which you press the button. So in reality, what you're doing is you're reacting to the current situation and then you press a button. So what we call preemption we should actually call preemption basically like early reaction, right? And then you can also say, okay, so I can play more reactive, which is more of a late reaction, where you give yourself more information to react to. So the difference is not in reacting, because you are reacting to the situation, because the buttons that you press make a lot of sense in every situation. The issue is you could be gathering more information before you react. Now, here's the thing, right? The reason why you struggle to do so is twofold, right? So you have two issues. So one is young Link can work with very little information. Why? Because his neutral is absolutely fucking bullshit. Like, best neutral in the game, arguably. So young Link neutral is absolutely insane. So you get away with acting on very little information. So that's like the other issue. The second issue is that letting the situation breathe can let your opponent set up their own pressure. So here's what I think kind of like the middle way is, right? So now that we kind of like established that reaction and preemption are kind of like the same thing, the issue is that like you're reacting at different moments. So what we need to identify is we need to identify the pros and cons of reacting at different times and what we can do to nuance these differences. So for example, like reacting early is like really good at basically dominating, right? So in other words, if you're already strong, then you're good. Reacting late is really good if you have the room to gather the extra info. In other words, if your opponent's already strong, you don't have the room to gather that much info, right? So like reacting late doesn't really make a lot of sense in those situations. So
what do you mean when you say like when the opponent's strong?
Right. So an example would be, let's say you are in the corner and Cloud is standing in his dash tag burst range and he's jumping at you. Well, by the time you react to the fact that the jump happens, you're already fucked, right? So in that situation, in a lot of cases, you probably have to act before you can react to their jump. So you don't have the luxury of reacting to the jump in the first place. Does that make sense?
Right, yeah.
So if they're already strong, it's harder to react late. However, we can do things to allow us the room to react late and still be safe. So a very easy example of that would be dash back. But another one that's big for young Link is shielding, right? So let's say instead of throwing fire arrow, we dash back. That means that they're probably not going to be strong because we just dashed away from them. And that little bit of extra buffer that we're giving ourselves, that is what allows us to play reactively and wait for our opponents. So in other words, when you talk about like, oh, I kind of struggle to play reactively effectively, or I'm kind of scared to give my opponent the room to make the right option, these options are really good because two things, right? So two things. So one, they give you room to be wrong, because if you think about it, right, like a dash back, very hard to actually go wrong. Worst case scenario, they take away the stage, which does suck, right? That does suck, but it's not the end of the world. The other thing is a lot of these options are very hard to punish. So if you think about like a dash back or a short hop back or a shield, if they want to hit a dash back, they have to like overshoot a dash stack. If they want to hit hit a shield, they have to grab you. All those things are like super committal. Like good luck grabbing freaking young Link when he's throwing out fire arrows and boomerangs, because if you dash up to grab him and he throws out a projectile, well, you're gonna get comboed, right?
Right. You just opened yourself up.
Exactly. So in other words, what we need to keep in mind is that the time we take to gather extra information is so safe that if we get punished for it, that in and of itself is enough information to win the set in the long run. Now, this is a super hard thing to do for young Link, because young Link is frail. He's fragile. Like, you get caught off stage by a snake dash attack, you get Nikita, you die at a 70, right? Very common.
Yep.
So a lot of other characters have an easier time doing this, where they can say, well, I'm going to be fainting here, I'm going to be waiting here for you to do something and then react. And then if you do punish that, if you do call it out, then I can punish you next time and I get I get a lot of reward out of that. That feels good for most characters, but for young Link, that feels really freaking bad. Because one, again, he's frail. And two, his normal neutral without like waiting for his opponent is strong enough that you don't need it. So why would we do this if it doesn't fit young Link? And now we go full circle back to what we talked about before. And that is because we cannot consistently make the right decision. In other words, we do this because the chance of us being wrong when we wait a beat is lower than the chance of us being wrong if we constantly do things. That is the core difference between these two options. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Okay.
So this is something that is a lot easier to understand. It's a lot easier to understand on a rational level and a lot harder to understand on an intuitive level.
Yeah.
And that is why, like, my recommendation. So here we go to like a practical recommendation. So this is what I want you to do. In your zoning patterns, add dash back as an option. Okay? And instead of waiting in general, just add dash back as an option with its own like risk reward and expected outcome and intention, etc. So like if they do X, then I could stop them with boomerang, but I can also stop them with dash back, right? So let's say if they jump in, I could do an up angled boomerang, but I can also dash back and then wait, okay? So that's like something you can add. And by adding just this, it's not necessarily reactive play, as in like you're not like suddenly playing super reactive, but you're adding an element of reaction to an already established flowchart. So the way I look at it is this, right? Oh, go ahead.
Basically giving myself like the conditions to do so, to react.
Exactly. And by putting yourself in that situation, you will naturally pick up when it's strong, what to do when the situation occurs, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that, like, this is how I look at it, right? So let's say we have our like zoning, right? So we call this zoning. I'm drawing this out. You'll see this on the stream soon. So within zoning, we have our own like flow chart. It's like, okay, we have option A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have option 1, 2, 3. And then we have our X, Ys, and Zs. Basically, we have like an entire set of mix-ups within your zoning, which you do. However, here's the thing, right? If I am Apollo Kage and I'm playing against you, then I can say, okay, I can play these mix-ups between like A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3, and X, Y, Z. Like I can play this mix-up, but I can also say my general strategy is meant to counter zoning as a whole. And while you will have mix-ups within zoning that will counter his anti-zoning, overall, on a strategical level, his strategy will outperform you because you only rely on zoning. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're adding a new strategy that is reacting, and that's going to have its own like set of mix-ups as well, and its own flowchart and its ABCs and 1, 2, 3s and XYZs. And what that does is that means that someone cannot just beat you by understanding your strategy and countering the strategy itself. That is what we're getting at. Okay.
Damn, that's big.
It is big. It's huge. No, that's insane. Because like all of these mix-ups within zoning, like if I look at the way you zone, your zoning is good. I could give you feedback on your zoning and like they would be like minor improvements, but like when I look at it, it's like it's solid. You figure it out. It could be optimized more, but I think rather than like
for sure
being a like, if I don't know if you watch like anime, but you have like those power level charts where they have like spider charts. Okay, so like instead of going like 12 out of 10 on zoning, I think instead we should just add like new strategies to you so that you can be more well-rounded, and it will make it easier on you to be correct as well. Because here's the thing, right? Let's say you have a 12 out of 10 in zoning. If someone plays the counter zoning, like for example a wolf player, then you're fucked, right? So if we add a strategy that works in that context of a wolf player, then we're going to be way stronger in way more situations with way less pressure on ourselves to continually be correct.
So it's very